Hello and welcome to Sleep Stories, the place where we listen, we relax, and we gently drift into sleep. Thank you for being here tonight. It's wonderful to have you with us as we settle down together. Tonight we'll be sharing a dreamy, slow retelling of the timeless fairy tale Beauty and the Beast, a gentle, autumnal story filled with quiet gardens, mysterious castles, and the soft magic of kindness. Perfect for carrying you into a peaceful night's rest. Before we begin, let's take a quiet moment to get comfortable. Find your favorite position, adjust your pillows, let the covers feel soft and warm around you. As you settle, bring your attention to your breath. There's no need to change it, simply notice the gentle rise and fall. And if you like, let each exhale become a little longer, a little softer, releasing any leftover tension from the day. With every breath out, feel your body growing heavier, your shoulders easing down, your mind becoming quieter. If thoughts drift in, that's perfectly okay. Just let them pass like clouds on a slow-moving sky, and return gently to the rhythm of your breathing. Tonight, as you listen, allow the story and these calm sounds to guide you deeper into relaxation. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just rest, listen, and let sleep come when it's ready. And now, without any hurry at all, let's begin. Once upon a time, in a land of rolling hills and quiet villages, there lived a wealthy merchant named Laurent. He had made his fortune through trading ships that sailed across distant seas, bringing back silks, spices, and treasures from faraway places. Laurent was a widower, raising 6 children on his own, 3 sons and 3 daughters, in a grand house filled with fine things and the laughter of a privileged life. But one terrible season, storm after storm struck the oceans. Ship after ship was lost. Word came slowly, painfully. His entire fleet had vanished. When the debts were finally called in, the family's world changed overnight. The beautiful house was sold. The elegant furniture, the carriage, the sparkling jewelry, everything was taken or auctioned away. Laurent and his children left the bustle of the town and moved to a small, simple cottage on the edge of a quiet forest. Laurent was often away, traveling from town to town, hoping to find new partners, new investments, anything to rebuild what had been lost. While he was gone, his children, now nearly grown, were left to care for themselves and the little home. The 3 sons and the 2 eldest daughters had grown up surrounded by servants. They knew little of cooking, cleaning, or tending a garden. They spent their days complaining, reading novels, or daydreaming of the life they once had. But the youngest daughter, Camille, was different. She was gentle, thoughtful, and kind. Though she too missed the comforts of their old life, she saw how unhappy her siblings were and how worried her father had become. Quietly, without complaint, Camille began to learn the tasks that now filled their days. She asked the villagers for help, how to bake bread that rose light and golden, how to plant seeds so they would grow strong, how to care for a few chickens and gather their eggs each morning. At first the villagers were cautious. After all, this was the once rich merchant's daughter. But Camille's sweet nature and willing hands soon won them over. She worked hard, with a smile and a thank you, and in time, the villagers came to love her. While her brothers and older sisters sulked and did little, Camille became the quiet heart of the cottage. She kept the floors swept, the hearth warm, the table set with simple but nourishing meals. The cottage began to feel like a home again. Small, yes, but tidy and filled with a gentle sense of baking bread and drying herbs. Nearly 2 years passed in this quieter life. The older children still dreamed of returning to wealth and ease, but Camille had found a kind of peace in the rhythm of useful days. Then, one ordinary autumn morning, a messenger arrived with astonishing news. One of Laurent's lost ships had been sighted, limping into port with its cargo mostly safe. The family gathered around the messenger in disbelief, then joy. The older siblings cheered, their days of exile were over. Fine clothes, parties, city life would soon return. Camille smiled at their happiness, but her feelings were more mixed. She had come to love the little cottage, the garden she tended, the bread she baked, the quiet evenings by the fire. Still, she was glad for her family. Laurent prepared to ride to the port at once. It was a journey of several days on horseback. Before leaving, he asked each child what gift they would like him to bring back from the city. now that fortune smiled again. The older ones asked for luxuries: silk dresses, velvet coats, jeweled buckles, feathered hats. When he turned to Camille, she was quiet for a long moment. Finally, softly, she said, "Father, I have always wished to see a real rose. They don't grow in our part of the country, and they are so rare and beautiful. If you could bring me just one rose, any color, that would make me happier than anything." Laurent smiled at his youngest daughter's simple wish and promised he would. Privately, he thought he might bring her something finer as well, perhaps a necklace to match the flower. The morning of his departure was bright and crisp, the forest path dappled with golden light. Camille packed his saddlebags carefully, fresh bread, cheese, apples for the journey, and waved until he vanished among the trees. The others were already planning their return to grandeur. Camille stood a little longer, a quiet feeling of unease settling in her heart. She brushed it aside. Surely everything would be well now. While his children waited at the cottage, Laurent rode toward the port, his mind full of plans for new ships, new trade, new wealth. But when he arrived, his hopes crumbled. Yes, the ship had returned, cargo mostly intact. But word of his good fortune had spread quickly. Creditors descended like hawks, claiming every coin, every bolt of cloth, every spice to settle old debts. By the time Laurent reached the docks, there was nothing left for him. No money to invest. No money even for the gifts he had promised. Devastated, he could not bear to stay in the city. Without rest or proper supplies, he mounted his weary horse and turned homeward the same day. Night fell as he rode. Then a storm broke, fierce, sudden, merciless. One moment, Laurent was riding steadily along the provincial road, the last faint light of dusk fading behind the trees, his mind heavy with the day's crushing disappointment. The sky had been sullen all afternoon, clouds thick and low, but the air still held a deceptive calm. He urged his tired horse onward, thinking only of home, of his children's faces when he returned empty-handed once more, of how to soften the blow with words of hope he barely felt himself. The next moment, the heavens split open. It began with a low rumble, distant thunder rolling like a warning across the darkening landscape. Laurent glanced up, frowning at the bruised purple clouds gathering overhead. A gust of wind stirred the leaves beside the road, carrying the sharp, metallic scent of rain. Then lightning cracked, a blinding fork that lit the world white for an instant, illuminating every tree and stone in stark relief. Thunder followed immediately, a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath the horse's hooves. The animal shied violently, ears flat, eyes rolling white with terror. Before Laurent could tighten the reins, the sky unleashed its fury. Rain lashed sideways in sheets, driven by a wind that howled through the trees like a living thing. It came so suddenly, so violently, that within seconds he was soaked to the bone, water streaming down his face, seeping through his cloak, chilling him to the core despite the day's earlier mildness. Lightning split the sky again and again, each flash revealing the road ahead in frozen moments, twisted branches clawing at the heavens, puddles forming instantly on the dirt path, the horse's mane plastered flat against its neck. Thunder roared without pause now, a continuous bombardment that drowned all other sound. Wind tore branches from trees, small ones first, whipping past like missiles, then larger limbs cracking and falling with ominous crashes into the underbrush. Laurent hunched forward, gripping the reins with numb fingers, shouting useless commands to his mount. But the horse, panicked beyond reason, bolted off the main road into dense, unfamiliar forest. Branches whipped at Laurent's face and arms as they plunged into the darkness. The path vanished, there was only undergrowth, roots, low-hanging limbs that threatened to unseat him. Rain hammered relentlessly, turning the ground to mud that sucked at the horse's hooves. Lightning flashed again, close, too close, illuminating twisted trunks and tangled vines in ghostly white. Thunder crashed immediately after, so loud it felt like the sky itself was breaking apart. The horse stumbled, recovered, plunged onward blindly. Laurent clung desperately, heart pounding, every muscle strained to stay mounted. Cold rain stung his skin like needles. Water streamed into his eyes, blurring vision. His cloak, once heavy wool protection, now clung sodden and useless. Lost in the howling darkness, Laurent searched desperately for shelter. He no longer knew direction, north, south, toward home or deeper into wilderness. The storm had swallowed the world. Trees loomed like giants on every side, their branches thrashing wildly. The wind screamed through leaves, carrying the scent of wet earth and broken wood. Lightning revealed glimpses, a fallen log blocking the way, a stream suddenly swollen and rushing, rocks slick with rain. The horse slowed at last, exhausted and trembling, but still skittish at every thunderclap. Laurent slid from the saddle, legs nearly giving way beneath him. He grasped the reins tightly, stroking the animal's neck, murmuring soothing words though his own voice shook. "We must find shelter," he whispered, more to himself than the horse. "We cannot survive this night in the open." He led the weary animal forward on foot, one hand on the reins, the other outstretched to feel for obstacles in the near blackness. Rain continued its merciless assault, driven nearly horizontal by the wind. His boots sank into mud with every step, cold water seeped through seams. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, he saw it. A high stone wall rising from the undergrowth ahead, solid and ancient, stretching into darkness on either side. Hope flickered amid despair. A wall meant civilization, perhaps a manor, a farm, some habitation where he might beg shelter. He pressed onward, pulling the reluctant horse behind. The wall was taller than he first thought, twice his height, built of massive blocks weathered by centuries. Moss and ivy clung to its surface, rainwater cascaded down in rivulets. Following it, stumbling over roots, pushing through wet foliage, he searched for an entrance. At last, through the storm, he found tall iron gates standing slightly ajar. They were ornate, wrought with curling patterns now rusted and overgrown with vines, but strong, tall enough for a carriage, wide enough for several riders abreast. One gate hung open just enough for a man and horse to pass. Laurent hesitated only a moment. Propriety warred with survival. This was private property, uninvited entry trespass, but the storm allowed no choice. He and his horse would perish in the open. Murmuring apology to whatever unseen owner might exist, he led the horse through the gap. The gates creaked softly as they passed, then swung slightly in the wind. Beyond lay a long paved path that disappeared into swirling rain and shadow. Laurent followed it, boots slipping on wet stones, horse plodding wearily behind. The wind seemed less fierce within the walls, muffled somehow, as though the grounds themselves offered protection. Rain still fell heavily, but the worst gusts were broken by tall trees lining the path. Lightning revealed glimpses, overgrown gardens pressing close, statues half hidden in foliage, fountains silent and leaf-filled. Then, a massive building loomed ahead, a grand, silent chateau. It emerged from the darkness like something from an old tale, enormous, rectangular, with wings extending on either side, tall narrow windows staring blankly into the storm. A sloping roof bristling with chimneys rose against the lightning-lit sky. The structure was both beautiful and forbidding, elegant in design, yet neglected, ivy climbing walls, windows dark. No lights shone from within. No smoke rose from chimneys despite the cold rain. Yet it offered shelter, solid walls, a roof against the storm. Laurent approached the wide front steps, leading his shivering horse. He found a sheltered alcove to the side, perhaps once for carriages, with a ring set in the wall for tethering animals. He tied the horse securely there, out of the worst rain, stroking her neck and murmuring reassurance. Then, cloak dripping, boots squelching, he climbed the steps to the enormous front door. It was oak, bound with iron, carved with patterns worn smooth by time. An iron knocker, shaped like a lion's head, hung heavily in the center. He lifted it with numb fingers and let it fall. The sound boomed through the storm, deep, resonant, echoing. He waited, breath clouding, rain drumming on the stone portico above. No answer. Lightning flashed again, thunder rolling immediately after. He knocked once more, harder, urgent. Still nothing. No footsteps within. No lantern light appearing. No voice challenging him. Desperation mounted. The cold had seeped into his bones, exhaustion threatened to buckle his knees. He could not return to the open forest. One last time, he knocked. No answer. Then, desperate, near collapse from cold and exhaustion, he pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. Laurent stood on the wide stone steps of the chateau, rain still dripping from his cloak, the wind whipping around him in cold, relentless gusts. His hand, numb from gripping the reins through the storm, rose once more to the massive iron knocker shaped like a lion's head. He lifted it and let it fall with a heavy thud that echoed through the night like distant thunder. He waited, breath clouding in the chill air, listening. Nothing. Only the howl of the wind through the tall trees beyond the courtyard, the steady lash of rain on stone, and the occasional creak of branches overhead. He knocked again, harder this time, the sound ringing louder, more urgent. Still no answer. No footsteps approaching from within. No flicker of lantern light in the narrow windows high above. No voice calling out to challenge the late-night intruder. Desperate, near collapse from cold and exhaustion, he pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The door was enormous, thick oak bound with iron, taller than 2 men. It resisted at first, as if reluctant to admit him. But with a firm shove of his shoulder, it swung inward on surprisingly silent hinges. A rush of warmer air greeted him, carrying faint scents of wood smoke, beeswax, and something savory. Food, perhaps. He stumbled over the threshold, catching himself on the doorframe as his frozen legs nearly gave way. The entryway beyond was vast and dimly lit by moonlight filtering through high, narrow windows. His boots echoed on cold flagstones as he pulled the door closed behind him. Not fully, leaving a small crack in case he needed to flee quickly, and leaned against it for support. The silence within was profound. After the raging storm outside, it felt almost unnatural, a thick, heavy quiet that pressed against his ears. No wind, no rain, no creak of the building settling. Only his own ragged breathing and the soft drip of water from his cloak onto the stone floor. He stood there for a long moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The entry hall was grand beyond anything he had expected, a sweeping space with a high vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, twin curved staircases rising on either side like the wings of some great bird, and suits of ancient armor standing sentinel along the walls, their empty visors gleaming faintly. Ahead, across the expanse of flagstones, a set of tall double doors stood slightly ajar. From the narrow gap between them came a faint glow, warm, golden, inviting. Firelight. Calling out softly, still no reply. Hello. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again, a little louder. Is anyone here? I seek shelter from the storm. I mean no harm. The words echoed faintly off the stone walls and died away. Nothing. No footsteps. No voice answering from the shadows above or beyond. Only that steady, welcoming glow from the doors ahead. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his boots sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The air inside was warmer than outside, but still carried a chill, as though the vast house had been empty for some time, holding on to winter's breath. He approached the double doors slowly, heart pounding. Every instinct told him to turn back. This was trespass, intrusion, but the thought of returning to the storm, of his horse suffering outside, of himself freezing in the dark forest, it was unbearable. He pushed those doors open and entered a warm, fire-lit room. The doors swung inward smoothly, revealing a chamber that felt both grand and intimate. A massive stone hearth dominated one wall, a roaring fire blazing within, logs crackling and popping, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. The warmth hit him like a gentle embrace, drawing him forward almost against his will. The room was a study or sitting room of sorts, richly paneled walls lined with bookshelves stretching to the high ceiling, leather-bound volumes glinting in the firelight. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows now lashed by rain. A thick rug covered the floor, patterned in deep reds and golds. In the center, near the fire, a small table was set for one. Fresh bread, a golden loaf still steaming slightly, as though recently baked, sat beside a roasted fowl, skin crisp and fragrant with herbs. A wedge of cheese, pale and creamy. A bowl of autumn fruits, apples, pears, a few late figs. And a crystal carafe of deep red wine, with a single large goblet waiting beside it. An armchair, wide, deep, upholstered in soft leather, weighted by the roaring hearth, positioned perfectly to catch the fire's warmth. Yet no host appeared. Laurent stood frozen in the doorway, taking it all in. The table set so precisely, the fire built high and tended. Someone had been here recently. And yet, the room was empty. Silent, save for the fire's gentle song. He called out once more, voice trembling slightly. "Hello. Thank you for the shelter. I was caught in the storm. I will gladly pay for any hospitality." Only the fire answered, crackling softly. He stepped further in, closing the doors behind him with a soft click. The warmth enveloped him fully now, thawing his numb fingers, easing the ache in his bones. His gaze returned to the table. His stomach growled audibly. He had eaten almost nothing since morning, and the long ride through wind and rain had left him weak with hunger. He approached slowly, as though expecting someone to emerge from the shadows and demand explanation. But the room remained empty. The aroma of the bread and meat rose to meet him, rosemary, garlic, warm yeast. His mouth watered involuntarily. He hesitated at the table's edge, hands hovering. This was wrong, eating a stranger's food uninvited. But the storm raged outside. He was miles from any village. His horse needed rest. And the meal, it would only grow cold. Perhaps the owner was away, sheltering elsewhere from the storm. Perhaps this was meant for a servant who had not yet arrived. He sat, slowly, carefully, in one of the chairs at the table. First, just a small piece of bread to quiet the hunger. It was still warm, crust crackling as he tore it. The inside soft, flavorful. He ate it gratefully, then another piece. The roasted meat was tender, perfectly seasoned. The cheese rich and smooth. He poured wine, full-bodied, warming as it slid down his throat. With each bite, tension eased from his shoulders. The fire's glow bathed the room in golden light, shadows dancing gently on books and paneling. He ate slowly, savoring, not greedily, but with deep gratitude. The simple act of nourishment felt like a gift after the night's terrors. When the plate was nearly empty and the carafe half drained, warmth and food soothed him completely. The long day, the dashed hopes at the port, the storm, the fear, caught up all at once. He moved to the armchair by the hearth, sinking into its deep embrace. The leather was soft, worn from use. The fire's heat wrapped around him like a blanket. His eyelids grew heavy. He told himself he would only rest a moment, wait for the owner, explain everything properly. But the chair was too comfortable, the fire too inviting, the room too peaceful. Exhausted, he sank into the chair, and fell into deep sleep. Laurent sat in the armchair for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the richly paneled walls and the stacks of books that seemed to lean in from every side, as if listening. The room was comfortable in a way that felt both welcoming and strange, too grand for one person, yet lived in enough to suggest someone spent long evenings here alone. He shifted in the deep cushions, the leather creaking beneath him. His soaked cloak hung heavy on his shoulders, dripping steadily onto the thick rug. The warmth from the hearth began to seep into his chilled bones, easing the ache of the long ride and the terror of the storm. But his stomach growled loudly in the quiet, reminding him he had eaten almost nothing since leaving the city. His eyes kept returning to the table set for one. A simple but inviting meal waited, a fresh loaf of bread with a golden crust, a small roasted fowl still fragrant with herbs, a wedge of cheese, and a carafe of deep red wine beside a large glass. A bowl of late autumn apples and pears added color to the spread. At first, politeness held him back. This was not his home. He was an intruder, uninvited and unannounced. He called out again, softly, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But only the wind answered from outside, rattling the tall windows. The silence stretched on. Hunger overwhelmed politeness. Laurent rose slowly, as if expecting someone to appear and scold him at any moment. He approached the table, hands trembling slightly from cold and nerves. First, he tore off a small piece of bread, still warm as though freshly baked. The crust cracked satisfyingly, releasing a comforting aroma that made his mouth water. He ate it cautiously, then another piece, and another. The roasted meat was tender, flavored with rosemary and garlic. The cheese creamy and sharp. He poured wine into the glass, rich and full-bodied, warming him from the inside as it went down. Gratitude mingled with guilt. Whoever lived here had prepared this meal, and now he was consuming it without permission. But the storm outside howled on, and he told himself the food would only go cold and wasted. He would explain in the morning, offer payment or labor in return. He ate slowly at first, then with growing appetite, the simple act of nourishment soothing body and spirit alike. The fire popped and settled, casting golden light across the room. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, hundreds, perhaps thousands, their leather spines glinting in the firelight. A sense of peace settled over him, unexpected and profound. Warmth and food soothed him. The wine loosened tense muscles, the fire dried his clothes. Exhaustion from the harrowing night caught up, the storm, the bolting horse, the fear of death in the forest. He returned to the armchair, sinking deep into its embrace. The cushions enveloped him like a gentle hug. His eyelids grew heavy. He told himself he would only rest a moment, wait for the owner, explain everything. But the chair was too comfortable, the room too quiet, the fire too inviting. Exhausted, he sank into the chair, and fell into deep sleep. He slumbered through the night without dreaming, a profound, restorative rest deeper than any in months. No storms disturbed him, no creditors haunted his thoughts, no worries about his children or lost fortune pierced the darkness. Only warmth, silence, and the faint scent of wood smoke. Morning light woke him. Soft, pale rays filtered through tall windows, painting the room in gentle gold. The fire had burned low, embers glowing faintly beneath gray ash. Laurent stirred, disoriented for a moment. Where was he? Then memory returned in a rush. The storm, the chateau, the meal. He sat up slowly, blinking at the table. The plates remained as he had left them, half-eaten fowl, crumbs of bread, empty glass and carafe. Untouched by anyone else. No host had come. No servant had cleared away. The house remained silent as the grave. A wave of embarrassment washed over him. He had entered uninvited, eaten a stranger's dinner, slept in their chair, and still no one had appeared. What kind of place was this? Abandoned? Or watched by unseen eyes? He rose stiffly, joints protesting the night in the chair. His cloak had dried by the fire, stiff with mud but warm. He smoothed his rumpled clothes as best he could, feeling like a thief caught in the act. Better to leave quietly before the owner returned, he decided. He could send payment later, or an explanation, something to make amends. Slipping through the double doors into the grand entryway, he moved on soft feet past the silent suits of armor lining the walls. Morning light now revealed details hidden in last night's gloom, a sweeping double staircase curving upward, faded tapestries depicting hunts and feasts, flagstone floor worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The massive front door stood as he had left it, slightly ajar. He pulled it open with effort, stepping into crisp morning air. The storm had passed. Mist hung low over the courtyard, softening edges of overgrown gardens. Birds sang tentatively in distant trees. His horse nickered softly from the sheltered alcove where he had tied her, safe, fed perhaps by some unseen hand, for a small pile of hay lay nearby. Relief flooded him. At least the animal had fared well. He untied her, stroked her neck gratefully, then led her slowly down the paved walkway toward the gate. As he walked, the gardens revealed themselves in daylight, beautiful but neglected, wild in their abundance. Roses climbed stone walls in tangled profusion, late blooms heavy with dew. Fruit trees sagged with unpicked apples and pears. Herbs spilled from cracked borders, scenting the air with mint and thyme. In a rose-covered pergola near the path's end stood a bush heavy with perfect pink blooms, the most exquisite roses he had ever seen. Their petals were layered silk, color soft as dawn, fragrance drifting sweetly even from a distance. No thorn marred their perfection, They seemed to glow in the morning light. Laurent stopped, transfixed. Remembering Camille's wish, her quiet voice asking for just one rose, the only gift she desired when others demanded finery, his heart twisted. One rose would never be enough to soften the news he carried. Fortune lost again, gifts impossible, family facing deeper hardship. He glanced back at the silent chateau, no movement, no sound. The bush stood untended, blooms perfect but unnoticed. Surely the owner, absent last night, perhaps away, would not miss a few. He drew his small knife, approached the pergola. The roses were magnificent up close, each bloom flawless, petals unfurling like secrets. He cut carefully, one by one, gathering a generous bouquet. Not just one for Camille, one for each child, to sweeten bitter truth. Absorbed in gathering the flowers, inhaling their intoxicating scent, marveling at delicate perfection, he did not hear approaching footsteps. A deep, angry voice froze him. "What do you think you are doing?" Laurent turned to face a towering figure, broad, muscular, covered in thick hair, features fierce and prominent. The man, if man he was, glared with burning eyes. Laurent stammered apologies, thought the place empty, shelter from storm, dinner wasted otherwise, roses for daughter. The beast listened in silence. Then, "You ate my food, slept in my house, I might have forgiven. But these roses, from my most treasured bush, priceless to me. You will pay." The words struck Laurent like a physical blow. He stood frozen in the overgrown pergola, the bouquet of freshly cut pink roses dangling limply from his left hand, petals trembling in the morning breeze. The man, if man he truly was, towered before him, broad-shouldered and immense, his face half hidden beneath a wild mane of dark hair and beard that gave him the appearance of something between human and wild creature. His eyes burned with a fierce, wounded fury, and his voice, when he spoke, was a deep growl that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the garden path. Laurent's mouth went dry. His mind raced back over the previous night, the storm-lashed ride, the desperate search for shelter, the unlocked door, the firelit room, the untouched dinner that had tempted his starving body. He had convinced himself the owner was absent, that the meal would go to waste, that no harm was done. But now, confronted by this towering figure in rumpled linen shirt and breeches, he felt the full weight of his trespass. He stammered apologies, words tumbling out in a rush. I thought the chateau empty, sir. The gate stood open. The storm was ferocious. My horse and I would not have survived the night without shelter. The dinner. I was famished. I meant no theft, truly. I would have explained myself in the morning, paid for what I took. The beast, for so Laurent's terrified mind now named him, listened in stony silence, arms crossed over his massive chest. His gaze flicked to the stripped rose bush behind Laurent, then back to the bouquet. Laurent followed his eyes and felt heat rise in his cheeks. The roses, yes. I see now my error. They are exquisite, unlike any I have seen. My youngest daughter asked for one, just one, as her gift. I promised her, after all my other promises failed. I thought, since no one seemed to tend them. His voice trailed off under the weight of that unyielding stare. The beast's expression did not soften. "These roses were planted by my mother," he said, voice low and rough, each word deliberate. "She tended this bush herself for years. It is the last living thing that carries her care, her memory. Every bloom is priceless to me, not for gold, but for what it means. You have taken every single one." Laurent's heart sank further. He opened his mouth to plead again, but the beast continued. "You will pay." Laurent spread his empty hands, desperation rising. "I have nothing left, sir. Truly nothing. The ship that brought hope returned, but creditors seized everything. I rode home with only these roses, stolen as it turns out, and no coin even for bread on the journey. I am a ruined man." The words spilled from Laurent in a rush, hoarse and broken, as he stood beneath the rose-covered pergola with a bouquet trembling in his grip. His voice cracked on the last phrase, echoing faintly among the overgrown gardens. The morning mist still clung to the stone walls and dew-laden leaves, softening the edges of the vast estate. But it did nothing to soften the fierce gaze fixed upon him. The beast regarded him for a long, silent moment, as if weighing his soul. Those eyes, dark, intense, framed by the wild tangle of hair and beard, bored into Laurent with an unnerving steadiness. There was no immediate outburst, no further growl of anger. Only silence, thick and heavy, broken by the distant call of a morning bird and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze that followed the storm. Laurent felt exposed, as though every desperation of his life lay bare. The lost fleet, the sold home, the children waiting with hopeful faces, the empty saddlebags that should have carried gifts and prosperity. He clutched the roses tighter, petals beginning to bruise under his fingers, their sweet fragrance now cloying in his nostrils, a reminder of yet another mistake. The beast stood motionless, arms crossed over his broad chest, linen shirt rumpled and untucked as though he had risen in haste. His height and build were intimidating, shoulders wide, limbs powerful, yet there was something in his posture that suggested restraint, a deliberate holding back. He did not advance or threaten physically. He simply watched, as if measuring truth against appearance. Laurent's heart pounded. He waited for rage, for accusation, for some violent demand. Instead, the silence stretched, drawing out his anxiety until it felt unbearable. At last, the beast spoke, voice low and measured. "Then you will work here until the debt is paid," he said at last. "Laborers are needed. The estate is large, the work endless. You will stay and serve." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of dread spreading through Laurent's chest. His stomach twisted. Work here. Stay. The idea was unthinkable. He pictured the cottage, small but warm, the garden Camille tended so carefully, the faces of his children gathered around the evening fire. They depended on him, not just for food and shelter, but for hope. He was the one who traveled, who sought new ventures, new partners, anything to lift them from poverty. Without him. "But my children, 6 at home." The protest burst from him, voice rising in pitch. "They depend on me. Without me to seek new ventures, new partners, they will starve. The cottage, the garden, who will provide?" He took a hesitant step forward, roses still clutched like a fragile shield. "I am their father. They have already lost so much, home, comfort, security. I cannot abandon them to this wilderness." The beast's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady, implacable. "Bring one in your place, or come yourself in 1 week. Or I will find you." The threat hung in the air like the morning mist clinging to the garden walls. It was not shouted, not snarled, spoken calmly, factually, yet it carried the weight of absolute certainty. The beast's gaze held no mercy, only wounded justice, the justice of a man whose treasured possession had been stripped bare before his eyes. Laurent felt his knees weaken. Images flashed through his mind, his children's faces lighting the cottage kitchen, Camille's gentle smile as she baked bread, Elisa's laughter, Philippe's confident stride, the younger ones playing in the garden. The modest cottage, with its thatched roof and small plot of vegetables, their only security now. Without him to seek work or investment, it would crumble. Creditors might come again. Hunger would gnaw. Winter loomed. He opened his mouth to beg, to bargain, offer future payment, promise labor later, anything, but no words came. Fear choked him. The beast's presence overwhelmed, towering height, fierce features, the raw power barely contained in stillness. The silence stretched again, broken only by a soft breeze stirring the remaining leaves on the stripped rose bush. Laurent's mind raced through impossible options: return alone and face the beast's wrath later? Flee entirely, hide the family? But where? With what resources? No. The beast's final words echoed, "Or I will find you." There would be no escape. With that, the beast turned on his heel and strode away, long, powerful steps carrying him up the path toward the looming chateau. He did not look back. His broad silhouette receded against the misty gardens, linen shirt billowing slightly in the breeze, until he vanished through a side door into the vast stone building. Laurent stood alone beneath the pergola, bouquet heavy in his hand, petals beginning to fall like silent tears onto the stone path. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off mist, gilding the overgrown gardens in soft light. Birds sang sweetly from hidden branches. The estate seemed peaceful, almost beautiful, yet to Laurent it felt like a prison closing around him. He mounted his horse slowly, movements mechanical, mind numb with dread. The ride home stretched endless. The same forest path that had seemed hopeful days ago now mocked him with beauty. Golden leaves drifting lazily, sunlight dappling the ground, air fresh with autumn promise. His thoughts circled relentlessly, the children's disappointment at empty gifts, explaining the new disaster, the beast's ultimatum. 1 week. 1 week to choose, himself into servitude, or send a child. The roses wilted further in his lap, fragrance fading. He arrived home late evening, cottage windows glowing warmly against gathering dusk. Children rushed out excitedly, then stopped at his hollow expression. He handed each a rose silently. Camille's eyes lit with wonder, inhaling deeply. The others, confusion, then dawning realization. Around the table that night, fire crackling softly, Laurent told everything, voice breaking on the beast's threat. Older siblings horrified, poverty deepened, father lost or child sacrificed. Camille quiet, listening, rose cradled gently. Then, I will go. I will take father's place. Laurent stood alone among the ruined rose bush, bouquet trembling in his grip, petals beginning to fall like tears. The morning mist still lingered in soft curls around the pergola, catching the gentle sunlight in delicate veils that drifted lazily across the overgrown gardens. Dew sparkled on the remaining leaves of nearby bushes, and the air carried the faint, sweet scent of late autumn blooms mixed with damp earth. Birds called softly to one another from hidden branches, their songs light and carefree, as though the world had not just delivered a devastating blow. But for Laurent, the beauty of the morning felt cruel, a mocking contrast to the storm that raged inside him. The rose bush before him, once heavy with perfect pink blooms, now stood stripped and bare, its branches reaching accusingly toward the sky. He had taken every flower, driven by a desperate wish to soften the bitter news he carried home. Now those same flowers, the cause of his ruin, wilted in his hand, petals loosening one by one, drifting down to the stone path like silent tears. He stared at them, numb. Each falling petal seemed to echo the beast's words, priceless to me, you will pay. The bouquet trembled in his grip, not just from the slight breeze but from the shaking of his own hands. His fingers, still chilled from the morning air, clutched the stems too tightly, thorns pricking through his gloves unnoticed. The fragrance that had enchanted him moments ago now felt heavy, cloying, a reminder of his folly. How had it come to this? Only yesterday he had ridden with cautious hope toward the port, dreaming of reclaimed fortune. Now he rode home with nothing, worse than nothing, carrying a sentence of servitude for himself or one of his beloved children. The ride home was a blur of despair. Laurent mounted his horse slowly, movements mechanical, as though his body belonged to someone else. The faithful animal sensed her master's heaviness at once, ears flicking back, steps careful and unhurried as they left the estate gates behind. The iron creaked softly as they passed through, then closed with a finality that echoed in Laurent's chest. The beautiful autumn day mocked him relentlessly. Golden sunlight filtered through leaves in dappled patterns across the forest path, painting the ground in warm light and shadow. Birds sang sweetly from branch to branch, cheerful trills and warbles that should have lifted the spirit but instead twisted the knife deeper. The air was crisp and clean after the storm, carrying scents of wet earth, fallen leaves, and distant wood smoke from some unseen cottage. Everything was as it should be, peaceful, vibrant, full of quiet promise. Yet for Laurent, the world had tilted on its axis. His mind replayed the confrontation endlessly, each moment sharp and unrelenting. The beast's wounded eyes when speaking of his mother, that raw flash of pain beneath the anger, quickly masked but unmistakable. The deep voice, rough as gravel yet controlled, planted by my mother, each bloom priceless, personal meaning. Laurent had seen grief there, not just rage. A man, creature, whatever he was, who carried loss like a hidden wound. Then the ultimatum, delivered with calm certainty, 1 week, yourself or another, or I will find you. The finality of it chilled him more than the storm ever had. 1 week. 1 week to deliver himself into servitude, or send a child. The roses, still clutched in his hand, had begun to wilt in the warmth of the day. Their once vibrant pink faded to a bruised softness, petals curling at the edges. The intoxicating fragrance that had drawn him to cut them now felt like accusation. Sweet turned cloying, beauty turned burden. He loosened his grip slightly, afraid of crushing them further, yet unable to let go. They were all he had to show for the journey, stolen flowers for a family expecting silk and jewels. The horse plodded steadily, sensing no need for haste. Hours passed in this slow procession through the forest. Sunlight shifted from morning gold to midday brightness, then softened toward afternoon amber. Lawrence's thoughts circled endlessly. His children, 6 faces flashing through his mind. Elise, eldest daughter, proud and quick to laugh, dreaming still of city finery. Philippe, the responsible son, already trying to act the man of the house. The middle ones, curious, playful, still believing father could fix anything. And Camille, his youngest, his beauty, gentle, thoughtful, the one who had asked only for a rose. How could he tell them? How could he choose? The cottage appeared at last as evening deepened, a small, sturdy building with thatched roof and glowing windows, smoke curling gently from the chimney. The sight should have brought comfort, but tonight it filled him with dread. He arrived home late that night, the cottage windows glowing softly with lamplight. The door burst open before he could dismount, children spilling out in excited rush, voices overlapping in joyful chaos. "Father, you're back. The gifts, where are they? Did you bring the silk? The buckles? Is the coach outside? Can we see?" Laurent stepped inside wearily, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo his despair. The warmth of the kitchen fire enveloped him, the familiar scent of wood smoke and baking bread, the soft crackle of logs, the worn table set for supper. But it did nothing to thaw the cold dread in his chest. His children gathered around, faces alight with expectation, eyes bright, smiles wide, hands reaching playfully toward his saddlebags still slung over his shoulder. He looked at them, really looked, memorizing each beloved face in the firelight. Elise's eager curiosity, Philippe's confident grin, the younger ones bouncing with barely contained excitement. Camille standing quietly at the back, eyes gentle and hopeful. Laurence's heart broke anew. Slowly, he opened his coat and drew out the drooping bouquet. One by one, he handed each child a rose. Camille's eyes lit with wonder as she accepted hers, lifting it gently to inhale the fading fragrance. "Oh, father, it's perfect," she whispered, tracing a petal with careful fingers. "More beautiful than I dreamed." The others stared in confusion, then disappointment, dawning realization. "But the silk?" Elise asked faintly. "The jewels?" Philippe pressed, voice uncertain. Laurent sank into his chair by the fire, the weight of the day, of years, pressing down. Around the table that night, beneath candlelight and the soft glow of the hearth, he told them everything. He looked at their eager faces, Elise's bright curiosity, Philippe's confident smile, the younger ones bouncing with anticipation, and felt his heart break anew. The cottage door had barely closed behind him when the children surrounded him, a whirlwind of excitement and affection that usually warmed his weary soul after long journeys. Tonight, it only deepened the ache in his chest. Elise, the eldest daughter at 19, leaned forward with sparkling eyes, her dark curls escaping their ribbon as she peered hopefully at his saddlebags. "Father, tell us, did the ship bring silks? The kind with the golden threads you promised?" Philippe, 17 and already trying to carry himself like the man of the house, grinned broadly, clapping Laurent on the shoulder. "And the buckles for my boots? The silver ones? I've been saving a spot on my belt just for them." The middle children, twins Mark and Sophie, 15 and full of restless energy, bounced on their toes, voices overlapping. "The jewels for Sophie's necklace? The new hat with feathers for me?" Even the youngest boy, 12-year-old Julien, tugged at Lauren's coat. "Did you bring the coach? Is it outside? Can we ride in it tomorrow?" And there, at the back of the group but always present in his heart, stood Camille, 16, quiet and watchful, her gentle face lit with soft hope rather than demands. She said nothing, but her eyes searched his face, sensing already that something was wrong. Laurent looked at them all, these beloved faces he had raised alone since their mother's death, faces that had known comfort once and now knew only scraping by, and felt his heart break anew. The joy in their eyes, the innocent expectation. It was a knife twisting slowly. He had ridden home with nothing, worse than nothing. No gifts, no fortune, no good news. Only a sentence hanging over them all. He swallowed hard, forcing a weary smile that felt like a lie. Slowly, he opened his coat and drew out the bouquet of now drooping pink roses. The stems were bruised from the long ride, petals curling at the edges, fragrance faded but still faintly sweet. He held them out like an offering, or an apology. One by one, he handed a rose to each child. Elise accepted hers hesitantly, curiosity fading to puzzlement. Philippe took his with a furrowed brow. The twins stared at their blooms in confusion. Julien sniffed his experimentally, then looked up. A flower. Camille's eyes lit with wonder as she accepted hers, lifting it gently to her nose and inhaling deeply. "Oh, father, it's perfect," she whispered, voice soft with genuine delight. "More beautiful than I dreamed. The color, like dawn on snow. And the scent." She closed her eyes briefly, breathing it in again. "Thank you." For a moment, her pure joy pierced the gloom in Lauren's heart. His youngest, always content with little, finding beauty where others saw lack. The others stared in confusion, then disappointment. "But, the silk?" Elise asked faintly, turning her rose over as though expecting fabric hidden among the petals. "The buckles?" Philippe pressed, voice uncertain now. "The coach?" Julien added, hope dimming. Laurent sank into a chair by the fire, the weight of the day, the weeks, the years, pressing down on him. The familiar chair creaked beneath him, the fire's warmth reaching out to ease chilled bones, but it did nothing to thaw the cold dread in his chest. The kitchen, their small sanctuary, felt both comforting and confining tonight. The scent of bread from Camille's earlier baking lingered, mingling with wood smoke and the faint sweetness of the roses now scattered across the table. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped tightly as if to hold himself together. The children gathered closer, excitement replaced by concern. Laurent began with the journey to the port. Voice low, steady at first, recounting the cautious hope that had carried him there. The ship sighted, cargo intact, dreams of rebuilding. Then the devastating truth. Creditors swift, everything seized. Empty saddlebags. No money. No gifts. He described the storm that drove him off the road. Fierce, sudden, merciless, lightning, thunder, wind tearing branches, rain lashing sideways. His frightened horse bolting into dense forest. Lost in howling darkness, searching desperately for shelter. The high stone wall, tall iron gates ajar, long paved path into swirling rain. The massive, silent chateau looming ahead. Tying the horse safely, enormous front door, knocking, no answer. Pushing inside, profound silence, faint glow from double doors. The warm, firelit room, table set for one, fresh bread, roasted meat, wine. Armchair by roaring hearth. Yet no host appeared. Hunger overwhelming politeness, eating gratefully, warmth and food soothing, exhausted sleep. Morning light, fire low, plates untouched by anyone else. Embarrassed decision to leave quietly. Slipping outside, horse safe. Beautiful overgrown gardens, rose-covered pergola, bush heavy with perfect pink blooms. Remembering Camille's wish. Cutting them all. One rose never enough to soften empty-handed return. Absorbed in gathering, not hearing footsteps. Deep, angry voice. What do you think you are doing? The confrontation, every word recounted, voice trembling. The beast's wounded eyes when speaking of his mother. The demand, priceless roses, you will pay. Pleading poverty, nothing left. The ultimatum, work here, or send another. 1 week, or I will find you. Around the crowded kitchen table that night, beneath the soft glow of candles, Laurent told the truth. The children listened in growing horror, faces paling in firelight, hands clutching roses forgotten. Older siblings exchanged glances of fear and disbelief. Younger ones huddled closer to Camille. When he finished, silence fell, heavy as the storm he had described. Then questions, protests, tears. But through it all, Camille remained quiet, Rose cradled gently, eyes thoughtful on her father's bowed head. The kitchen fell silent. The words of Laurent's tale, the storm, the mysterious chateau, the stolen roses, the beast's terrible demand, hung in the air like smoke from the dying fire. The crackle of logs in the hearth was the only sound for a long, heavy moment, the flames casting flickering shadows across the worn wooden table. The scattered wilted roses lay between them, their once vibrant petals now curled and bruised, a fragile reminder of both promise and failure. The older siblings looked horrified, faces pale, eyes wide. Elise, the eldest, clutched her rose stem so tightly that a thorn pricked her finger, a tiny bead of blood welling up unnoticed. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Philippe, trying so hard to be the man of the house, sat frozen, his confident smile gone, replaced by a stricken expression that made him look suddenly younger than his 17 years. The middle twins, Mark and Sophie, exchanged wide-eyed glances, hands clasped together under the table as they always did when frightened. Julien, the youngest boy at 12, shrank back in his chair, eyes darting toward the dark windows as though expecting a monstrous shadow to appear there. "How will we survive without you?" Elise whispered at last, voice trembling. The question seemed to break the spell, releasing a flood of fear. "Who will seek new business?" Philippe added, voice cracking with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "The contacts, the travels. You're the only one who knows how to find partners, father. Without you." "What if he comes here?" Julien asked fearfully, his small voice barely above a whisper. He glanced again at the windows, pulling his knees to his chest. That thing. What if he comes looking for us?" The questions tumbled over one another, voices rising in pitch. Fear, anger, disbelief mingling in the small room. The cottage, usually filled with the gentle rhythms of evening, Camille's soft humming while washing dishes, the scrape of chairs as stories were shared, now felt stifling, the walls closing in. Laurent sat with bowed head, hands clasped tightly in his lap, tears slipping silently down his weathered cheeks. He had carried the burden alone all day. Sharing it only seemed to make it heavier. Camille alone remained quiet throughout the telling, Rose cradled gently in her hands, eyes thoughtful. From her place at the end of the table, she had listened without interruption, not with the wide-eyed horror of her siblings, but with a calm, steady attention. The rose her father had brought her, the only gift fulfilled, rested in her palms like something precious and fragile. She turned it slowly, tracing the curled petals with one finger, inhaling the last faint traces of sweetness. She watched her father's bowed head, the defeat in his shoulders, the tears he tried to hide by staring into the fire. She saw the way his hands trembled, the deep lines of worry etched deeper than ever. This man who had carried them all through loss after loss, mother's death, the ruined fortune, the move to the cottage, now carried a weight that threatened to crush him entirely. When the others began voicing fears and complaints, questions sharp with panic, suggestions desperate and half-formed, Camille waited. She let the storm of words pass over her like wind through the garden outside, patient as she was when waiting for bread to rise or seeds to sprout. Then, softly but clearly, she spoke. "I will go. I will take father's place." The words left Camille's lips with a quiet certainty that silenced the small, crowded kitchen in an instant. It was as though a gentle hand had been laid over the chaos. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the worn wooden table where the family sat, the wilted roses from her father's failed journey still scattered like fallen petals between them. Everyone turned to look at her, Elise with wide eyes, Philippe with an open mouth ready to protest, the younger siblings frozen in disbelief. Even Laurent, her father, lifted his head slowly, staring as though he had not heard correctly, his weathered face paling further beneath the lamplight. The silence stretched, thick, astonished. Elise recovered first. "No, Camille, you cannot possibly mean it," she cried, voice rising in pitch. "You are the youngest. It is unthinkable." Philippe shook his head vigorously. "It should be one of us, one of the men. I could go. I'm stronger." Mark, usually quiet, found his voice. "Or me. We could endure labor better." Sophie clutched Camille's sleeve. "You've never been away from home. That place sounds terrifying." Julian, eyes wide with fear, whispered, "He's a beast, Camille. A real beast." But Camille's gaze remained steady, her voice calm as a still pond. "Father cannot go," she said gently but firmly. "He is needed here, to travel, to seek partners, to keep hope alive for all of us. Without him, we truly would be lost." She looked at each sibling in turn. "And none of you truly wish to leave. You have said it yourselves, how you dream of returning to comfort, to the city, to easier days. If one of you went, the cottage would fall apart. Who would tend the garden that feeds us? Who would bake, mend, keep order?" Elise opened her mouth, then closed it. Philippe shifted uncomfortably. Camille continued, voice soft but unyielding. "I have learned these things these past years, while others found them hard. I can cook, clean, garden. I can be useful there. And," she paused, swallowing the lump in her throat, but her eyes remained dry, "I can be spared." Lauren's face crumpled completely. "No," he whispered, voice breaking. "My little one, my beauty. I cannot allow it. That creature, fierce, wild. The chateau, isolated. You would be alone with him." He reached for her hand across the table, grasping it tightly. Camille squeezed back. "You are not allowing it, Father. I am choosing it." She offered the small, reassuring smile that had comforted them all through hard times. "And I will not be entirely alone. You mentioned the boy Gabriel who helps there. And I will have work, useful work, as I love. I am not afraid." The protests rose again, louder now, overlapping. "Elise, you're too young." "Philippe, it's not safe." "Sophie, what if he hurts you?" Julian began to cry quietly. But Camille waited, patient as ever. When the voices quieted, exhausted, she spoke once more, gently, reasonably, point by point. Father's travels were their only path forward. The cottage needed management, garden, chickens, bread, mending. She had the skills. Others did not. Her absence would disrupt least. One by one, arguments fell away. Laurent wept openly, head in hands. But in his heart, and theirs, they knew her logic sound. By the time the fire burned low and candles guttered, the decision stood. Camille would go. Preparations began the next day. Quiet, tender, filled with unspoken love. Protests rose immediately, overlapping in a rush of voices that filled the modest cottage. The small kitchen, usually a place of quiet routine and gentle evening rhythms, suddenly felt alive with urgency and fear. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering golden light across the worn wooden table where the family sat clustered together. The scattered wilted roses lay between them like fallen soldiers on a battlefield, their once vibrant petals now curled and bruised, releasing a faint, lingering sweetness that mingled with the comforting sense of wood smoke and leftover bread. "No, Camille, you cannot possibly mean it," Elise cried, her voice rising in pitch as she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if the very idea sent a chill through the room despite the fire's warmth. Elise, the eldest at 19, had always been the one to dream aloud of returning to their former life. Silk dresses, city parties, admirers. The thought of her youngest sister walking into danger shook her to the core. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she reached across the table toward Camille. "You are the youngest. It is unthinkable. We cannot send you, our little beauty, to that monster." Philippe, the eldest brother at 17, shook his head vigorously, his face flushing with a mix of anger and protectiveness. He had spent the past years trying to step into their father's role, chopping wood, attempting repairs, speaking with forced confidence about future plans. Now his voice cracked with emotion. "It should be one of us, one of the men," he insisted, thumping a fist lightly on the table for emphasis. "I will go in father's place if it comes to that. I'm stronger. I could endure whatever labor this creature demands." The middle brother, Mark, usually quiet and thoughtful, more comfortable with books than confrontation, found his voice unexpectedly. At 15, he had grown tall and lanky, but his words carried a surprising firmness. "Yes, or I could," he added, glancing at Philippe for support. "We are stronger. We could endure whatever labor this creature demands. Camille has never lifted anything heavier than a basket of laundry." Even the youngest boy, Julian, piped up, his voice cracking with emotion as childhood fears surfaced. At 12, he still carried the round cheeks and wide eyes of youth, and the story of the beast had painted terrifying pictures in his imagination. "Camille, you're a girl," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "You've never been away from home. That place sounds frightening. Dark halls and storms and him." Sophie, Mark's twin and the middle sister, clutched Camille's sleeve, her eyes brimming. "What if he hurts you? What if you never come back?" The protests overlapped, voices rising and falling like waves against the cottage walls. Fear, love, guilt, and desperation all tangled together. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as though the weight of the decision pressed down from the low ceiling beams. Laurent sat with head bowed, hands clasped tightly before him on the table, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. He had carried the burden alone all day. Hearing it reflected in his children's voices only deepened his anguish. But Camille remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her gaze steady. She did not flinch or raise her voice. She simply waited, patient as she had been when coaxing dough to rise, when planting fragile seeds in spring soil, when soothing a frightened sibling after a nightmare. The initial wave of objections crashed and receded, voices trailing off into uncertain silence as they realized she would not be swayed by panic alone. The fire crackled softly, a log shifting with a gentle pop. Outside, wind whispered through the garden herbs Camille had planted, carrying the faint scent of lavender through the cracked window. When the room settled into an expectant hush, broken only by the occasional sniffle or shifting chair, Camille spoke again. Her voice was soft yet unwavering, carrying the gentle authority she had earned over 2 years of quietly holding their fragile household together. "Father is needed here," she said simply, looking directly at Laurent. Her eyes met his, steady, loving, resolute. He must continue traveling, seeking partners, trying to rebuild what was lost. "Without him, we have no hope of ever leaving this cottage. He cannot be spared." She turned slowly, addressing each sibling in turn, Elise's tear-streaked face, Philippe's clenched jaw, Mark's worried frown, Sophie's trembling lip, Julian's wide eyes. "You all speak of strength," she continued gently. "But strength is not only in lifting heavy things or enduring hard labor. Strength is also in doing what must be done when no one else can." Elise wiped her eyes. "But Camille, you are the baby of the family. We should protect you." Camille smiled, small, sad, but warm. "And who protects the family if father is gone? Who keeps the garden growing, the bread baking, the cottage warm? I have learned these things. You have not. Not yet. My absence will be felt, yes, but the cottage will stand. Yours would not." Philippe shifted uncomfortably. "I could learn. We all could." Camille nodded. "In time, perhaps. But time is what we do not have." "1 week, father said. 1 week until he comes looking." A shiver passed through the room at that reminder. Julian whimpered softly. Camille reached across to touch his hand. "I am not so fragile as you think, little brother. I have faced storms of my own these past years, storms of hunger, of cold, of worry. This is only another." Laurent lifted his head at last, voice hoarse with grief. "My beauty, my brave girl. I cannot allow it. I brought this upon us. I will go myself. Camille moved to his side, kneeling and taking both his hands in hers. Father, she said softly, you are the only one who can bring us hope of better days. Your travels, your old friends, your knowledge of trade, these are our future. If you stay trapped in that place, we remain trapped here forever. But if I go, you are free to work, to dream, to bring us back to light. Tears streamed down Lauren's face. But alone, with that creature. Camille squeezed his hands. I will not be entirely alone. Father mentioned a boy, Gabriel, who helps there. And I will have work, useful work, as I love. And books, perhaps. Gardens to tend. I will write often. And, she smiled through her own rising tears, I will carry all of you with me, in my heart, every day. The room fell quiet again, a different silence now, heavy with acceptance slowly dawning. Elise sobbed softly into her shawl. Philippe stared at the table, jaw tight. The twins held hands. Julien crawled into Camille's lap like when he was small, burying his face in her shoulder. Laurent pulled her close, holding her as though she might vanish. No one spoke of alternatives anymore. The decision, though painful, felt inevitable, born not of weakness, but of the deepest love. Preparations began the next morning, quiet, tender, filled with unspoken promises. She turned to her siblings, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. The kitchen fire crackled softly, its golden light dancing across their faces, faces she knew as well as her own reflection. Elise's eyes were wide and glistening, filled with the same fear Camille felt in her own heart but refused to show. Philippe's jaw was set, his gaze defiant yet uncertain, the confident smile he usually wore now replaced by a troubled frown. Mark and Sophie, the twins, held hands under the table as they always did when anxious, their identical expressions a mirror of worry. Julien, the youngest, looked small and frightened, clutching his wilted rose like a talisman. Camille let the silence linger a moment longer, giving them space to feel the weight of her words. The cottage felt smaller tonight, the low ceiling beams pressing down, the familiar sense of wood smoke and drying herbs suddenly heavy with the gravity of what was being decided. And none of you truly wish to go, she said gently, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. You have said so yourselves these past years, how you long for the old life, the city, the comforts, the parties, the fine clothes, the ease of having servants. You dream of returning to that world, not laboring in some distant, gloomy chateau. She paused, letting the truth settle. If one of you left, the rest would fall into despair. The house would crumble. We would lose even this small security, the garden that feeds us, the bread on the table, the warmth of this fire. Who would tend the chickens? Who would mend the clothes, bake the bread, keep order when father is away seeking work? Elise opened her mouth to argue, lips parting as if to protest, but Camille raised a gentle hand, not commanding but asking for patience. The gesture was soft, familiar. It was the same hand that had soothed fevers, wiped tears, tucked blankets around sleeping siblings on cold nights. Elise closed her mouth, tears spilling over. I already know how to cook, clean, garden, mend, skills I have learned while the rest of you have found them difficult, Camille continued, choosing her words carefully, not wishing to wound but knowing truth was necessary now. I have risen early to knead dough, stayed late to finish mending. I have coaxed seeds to grow in poor soil, preserved fruits through winter, kept this cottage from falling apart when despair threatened to swallow us all. Her voice remained soft, but there was strength in it, the quiet strength of someone who had carried burdens without complaint. I can manage a household. I can be useful there. And she paused, swallowing the lump in her throat that threatened to choke her words. The room waited, breath held. I can be spared. The last phrase hung in the air, gentle yet devastating in its simplicity. Laurent's eyes filled with tears. He reached across the table, grasping her hand tightly in both of his rough, calloused hands that had once signed grand shipping contracts and now mended fences and chopped wood. My little one, he whispered, voice breaking like dry branches under snow. My beauty, I cannot ask this of you. That man, he is fierce, wild-looking. The chateau is isolated, gloomy. You would be alone with him, far from us, far from everything familiar. I will go myself. I brought this upon us with my folly, the roses, the trespass. I will face the consequences. His grip tightened, as though he could hold her there forever by sheer will. Camille squeezed his hand in return, her own eyes shining with unshed tears but steady, always steady. You are not asking, father, she said softly, leaning closer so he could see the resolve in her gaze. I am choosing. She offered a small, reassuring smile, the same smile that had comforted him through grief after her mother's death, through the ruin of their fortune, through every dark night when hope seemed lost. And I will not be entirely alone. You mentioned the boy Gabriel who helps with errands. He will be company of a sort. And I will have work to do, useful work as I do here. The kind that gives purpose to days. I am not afraid. The words were brave, but inside, fear fluttered like a trapped bird. She imagined the vast, silent chateau, dark halls, cold stone, the beast's fierce eyes. She imagined long nights far from this cottage's warmth, from her father's voice reading by the fire, from her siblings' laughter and complaints. But fear felt smaller than love, love for her father, who carried the weight of their survival, love for her siblings, who needed hope more than labor, love for the fragile life they had built here. Elise sobbed quietly now, pressing a hand to her mouth. Philippe stared at the table, jaw tight, fists clenched, anger at the injustice warring with guilt that he had not volunteered first. Mark and Sophie held each other, tears slipping down matching cheeks. Julien crawled into Camille's lap as he had when small, burying his face in her shoulder. Laurent wept openly, pulling her close. The protests faded, not because fear vanished, but because Camille's quiet certainty filled the space they left. The family sat together long into the night, fire burning low, candles guttering, holding one another, speaking in whispers of memories and promises. Camille comforted each in turn, reassuring Elise she would write often, promising Philippe she would be careful, telling the twins stories of gardens she might plant, hugging Julien until his tears slowed. Laurent held her hand throughout, as though letting go meant losing her forever. By dawn's first light, acceptance settled, sorrowful, but complete. Preparations began, quiet, tender, filled with love. The discussion stretched late into the night, voices rising and falling like wind through the trees outside the cottage windows. The small kitchen, once a haven of quiet routine, now felt charged with emotion, the air thick with fear, love, and the weight of an impossible choice. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the worn wooden table. Candles flickered in their holders, wax pooling at the bases, throwing soft golden light onto faces etched with worry. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the faint sweetness of the wilted roses scattered between them, a poignant reminder of the journey that had brought this crisis home. Her siblings argued passionately at first, words tumbling over one another in a rush of desperation and protectiveness. Philippe, the eldest brother, leaned forward, fists clenched on the table. I could go, he insisted again, voice firm though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. I'm strong enough for labor. I could work there and send money home, enough to keep us going until father finds new partners. Elise nodded vigorously, wiping tears with the edge of her shawl. Or I could find a position as governess in town, she offered, though her voice wavered. I'm educated, I could teach children of wealthy families. The pay would help, and I'd be close enough to visit. Mark, usually the quiet twin, spoke up unexpectedly. We could all take on more here, learn the garden, the cooking, share the chores properly for once. Sophie clutched Camille's sleeve. Yes, we'd manage. You don't have to go alone into that place. Even Julien, the youngest, piped up bravely through sniffles. I'll help more. I can feed the chickens and fetch water every day. But each idea crumbled under gentle scrutiny, not from harsh dismissal, but from the quiet light of reality Camille shone upon them. She listened patiently, her hands folded in her lap, Rose still cradled gently as though it might bruise further with rough handling. When Philippe spoke of working and sending money, she tilted her head thoughtfully. "You have no trade yet, brother," she said softly, without judgment. "Only dreams of commerce, as father once had. The beast demands labor now, immediate, endless," he said. "How would you send money with no wage promised? And who would teach you the skills needed there?" Philippe's shoulders sagged. He could not answer. Elisa's suggestion of governess work met similar gentle unraveling. "The wealthy families are few here," Camille reminded. "And they already have tutors from the city. You have recoiled at leaving comfort these past years. The thought of serving in another's home, far from us, teaching children who might mock your fallen status. Could you bear it?" Elisa's tears fell faster. She shook her head, unable to deny the truth. The twins' offer to share chores earned a small, sad smile from Camille. "You have tried before," she said kindly. "Remember the bread that burned black? The garden weeds that overtook the vegetables? The mending left tangled? I do not say this to shame you, only to remind that these skills come with time and practice. We have no time now." Julien's brave promise brought a tender touch to his cheek. "You are still growing, little one. The work is heavy for small hands. And someone must be here to learn from me before I go." Laurent wept openly at times, head in hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then he would rally, voice hoarse but fierce. "No, I forbid it. I will go myself. I brought this curse upon us with my foolishness, the trespass, the roses. I will face the consequences." But each time, Camille's quiet, undeniable logic returned, gentle as rainfall, persistent as roots seeking water. "Father," she would say, taking his hand again, "you are our only bridge to better days. Your old friends, your knowledge of trade routes, your name still carries weight in ports. If you are trapped in servitude, who will seek investment? Who will bring us hope?" He had no answer, only fresh tears. The arguments circled, fear giving way to guilt, guilt to resignation, resignation to sorrow. Outside, wind whispered through the garden herbs Camille had planted so carefully. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, their scents drifting faintly through the cracked window on cool night air. An owl called from distant trees, its lonely hoot echoing the family's mood. Candles burned lower, wax pooling, flames guttering in drafts. Exhaustion settled over the room like a heavy blanket, eyes heavy, voices softer, words slower. Everyone knew, in their hearts, that the decision was made. Camille would go. No one spoke it aloud again, there was no need. The fire burned low, embers glowing like fading hopes. They sat together in silence a long while, holding hands across the table, leaning on shoulders, drawing comfort from nearness. Laurent pulled Camille close at last, wrapping her in his arms as he had when she was small and afraid of thunder. "My brave girl," he whispered into her hair, voice thick with pride and grief. "My beauty." She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar scratch of his wool coat, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and home that clung to him. The others gathered around, Elise hugging from one side, Philippe from the other, the twins and Julien pressing close. They stayed like that until the last candle flickered out, a family bound tighter by love in the face of parting. Dawn would bring preparations. But tonight, they simply held one another in the dying firelight. Preparations took several days. Days filled with a strange mixture of tenderness, practicality, and unspoken sorrow that hung in the air like morning mist. The cottage, usually a place of quiet routine, now felt suspended in time. Every task carried extra weight, every glance between family members lingered a little longer. The autumn sun slanted low through the windows, casting golden light across the worn wooden floors and simple furnishings, as though the house itself understood the parting that loomed. Camille moved through these days with deliberate calm, her gentle nature guiding her as always. She rose early each morning, before the others stirred, to tend the fire and bake bread, the familiar rhythm of kneading dough and watching it rise giving her a small sense of control amid uncertainty. The scent of warm yeast filled the cottage, comforting and ordinary, a quiet anchor in the shifting world. She sorted through her few belongings with deliberate care, as if each item carried a piece of the life she was leaving. The family gathered in the main room to help, or perhaps to simply be near her. Elise folded linens with trembling hands. Philippe carried the small wooden trunk from the attic. The twins fetched water and helped air bedding. Julian trailed after her like a shadow, asking endless small questions to keep her voice in the room. Camille owned little now. The sales after their ruin had taken most luxuries. She laid her possessions on the table one by one, touching each with quiet reverence. 3 simple wool dresses, dyed practical colors, deep green, soft brown, sturdy gray, suitable for work and warm against winter chill. She smoothed the fabric, remembering how she had helped dye them herself from garden plants and onion skins, learning frugality alongside villagers. A warm cloak her mother had sewn years ago, before illness claimed her, thick wool lined with soft flannel, edges embroidered with tiny flowers in faded thread. Camille lifted it to her face, breathing deeply. Faint traces of lavender still clung to the fibers, carried from sachets her mother once tucked into drawers. The scent brought tears to her eyes, a ghost of gentle hands and bedtime stories. A pair of sturdy leather shoes, patched but serviceable, soles worn thin from garden paths and village errands, yet strong enough for the journey ahead. Her nightgown and underthings, carefully laundered and folded, simple cotton, mended neatly where seams had given way. She added her sewing kit, needles of various sizes tucked into a cork, threads wound on wooden spools in practical colors, a silver thimble worn smooth from use, small scissors with handles shaped like birds. All nestled in a small wooden box her father had carved one winter evening. Mending would likely be needed wherever she went, torn curtains in a grand house, perhaps, or clothing for the mysterious boy Gabriel. Her books were her greatest treasure. Only 4 volumes had survived the sales, carried secretly when finer things were taken. A worn Bible, its leather cover soft from years of reading by candlelight, passages marked with pressed flowers or bits of ribbon, verses that had comforted through dark times. A collection of poetry, pages yellowed but cherished, words of love, nature, quiet courage that had sustained her imagination when real life grew hard. A practical herbal, filled with drawings and recipes for remedies, how to soothe a fever with willow bark, ease coughs with honey and thyme, heal cuts with yarrow. Knowledge she had gathered from village women, now bound in a slim book. And a slim volume of fairy tales she had loved as a child, stories of enchanted forests, brave girls, magical transformations. She traced the faded cover, smiling sadly at the irony. She packed them gently between folded clothes in her trunk, wrapping each in a soft cloth to protect from jostling. The family watched in silence at times, helping when they could, Elise pressing a small knitted scarf into the trunk, for cold nights. Philippe adding his pocket knife, just in case. Julian slipping in a smooth stone he had found by the stream, for luck. On the evening before departure, she sat by the hearth with one of the roses her father had brought, the most perfect bloom, its petals still soft pink and fragrant despite the long, rough journey. The others had wilted quickly in the cottage's warmth, but this one held its beauty a little longer. Petals layered like silk, color gentle as dawn, fragrance delicate yet lingering. Camille held it carefully, turning it in the firelight. The room was quiet, siblings in bed early from exhaustion, father dozing in his chair after another long day of quiet grief. She opened her book of poetry to blank pages near the back, pages she had saved for special thoughts or pressed leaves. Carefully, reverently, she laid the rose flat between them, arranging petals so they would dry smooth and even. Then closed the cover. The flower would dry there, pressed and preserved, colors fading gently over time, but shape and memory enduring. A tangible reminder of why she was leaving, the promise made to protect her family, the small beauty carried into the unknown, the love that made sacrifice possible. She held the closed book to her chest for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing in the last fresh sweetness. Then placed it atop her folded clothes in the trunk, nestled safely between wool dresses and mother's cloak. Outside, wind whispered through the garden, herbs rustling softly, the few late flowers bowing in the breeze. Inside, the fire settled into embers, glowing warm and steady. Camille sat a while longer, watching flames die to coals, feeling the cottage's familiar embrace one last night. Tomorrow she would leave. But tonight she was still home. She held the closed book to her chest for a long moment, breathing in the faint sweetness that lingered, then placed it atop her folded clothes in the trunk. The fire in the hearth had settled into a soft bed of embers, casting a warm, flickering glow across the small bedroom Camille shared with her sisters. The cottage was quiet now, the rest of the family asleep or pretending to be, exhausted by days of preparation and the heavy emotions that filled every corner of their home. Only the occasional pop from the dying fire and the gentle sigh of wind through the thatched roof broke the stillness. Camille sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the poetry book still warm from her hands. The pressed rose inside, the last perfect bloom from her father's bouquet, released its delicate fragrance each time she opened the pages, a soft reminder of beauty carried forward into uncertainty. She pressed the book closer, eyes closed, letting the scent fill her senses one more time. It smelled of summer gardens and gentle promises, of the life she was leaving and the love that would follow her wherever she went. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for tears tomorrow. Tonight, she wanted to hold onto the quiet strength that had carried her this far. Finally, with careful tenderness, she placed the book atop her folded clothes in the small wooden trunk, nestled between the green wool dress and her mother's cloak, wrapped in a soft cloth to protect it on the journey. The trunk was nearly full now. Simple dresses, warm cloak, sturdy shoes, sewing kit, nightgown, a few personal treasures. Everything she owned in the world, packed with love and practicality. She closed the lid gently, running her fingers over the worn wood her father had carved years ago. Then she sat back, gazing around the familiar room one last time in the firelight, the shared beds with patched quilts, the small window looking out on the garden she had tended, the hooks on the wall holding cloaks and aprons. Departure morning dawned clear and bright, the autumn sky a pale, washed blue with only a few wisps of cloud drifting lazily overhead. Sunlight slanted golden through the cottage windows, painting warm stripes across the flagstone floor and glinting off the simple furnishings. A crisp breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, rustling the herbs in the garden outside, rosemary, thyme, lavender releasing their fragrance as they swayed. It was the kind of morning that should have felt full of promise. Birds singing cheerfully from the apple tree, dew sparkling on the grass, the world fresh and new after the recent storms. But instead it carried a weight of farewell, heavy and unspoken. The family gathered early, moving quietly through morning routines that felt both familiar and strangely final. Camille rose first, as always, kindling the fire and setting water to boil for tea. The scent of baking bread from the previous night still lingered, comforting in its ordinariness. Laurent had hitched their old, gentle horse to the small cart that would carry Camille's trunk and a few supplies for the journey. Fresh bread wrapped in cloth, a wedge of cheese, apples from the tree, a waterskin filled at the well. The horse stood patiently in the yard, occasionally flicking her tail or nosing at the grass, sensing the unusual quiet. The whole family gathered outside the cottage door, wrapped in cloaks against the morning chill. They stood in a loose circle, Laurent with shoulders bowed, eyes red from another sleepless night, Elise clutching her shawl tightly, Philippe trying to look strong but failing, the twins Marc and Sophie holding hands, Julien hovering close to Camille as though she might vanish if he let go. Her siblings, perhaps softened by the reality of parting, offered awkward embraces and murmured good wishes. Elise stepped forward first, eyes brimming. She pressed a small knitted scarf into Camille's hands, soft wool in gentle blue, edges finished with careful stitches. "For the cold evenings in that place," Elise whispered, voice thick. "I started it weeks ago, meant it for winter. Now it's yours." Camille wrapped it around her neck immediately, feeling the warmth of her sister's love in every loop. Philippe cleared his throat, avoiding eyes as he handed over his pocket knife, the one he had carried proudly since turning 15, handle worn smooth from use. "In case you need to cut kindling, or anything," he mumbled, then pulled her into a fierce, brief hug that surprised them both with its strength. Even the usually aloof middle brother, Marc, stepped forward shyly. He slipped a few coins into her palm, earnings from odd jobs in the village, saved quietly in a tin under his bed. "For whatever you might need," he said, cheeks flushing. Sophie added a small bundle of dried lavender from the garden, "For your pillow, to help you sleep." Julien, eyes wide and brimming, hugged her legs tightly, then pressed a smooth river stone into her hand. "For luck, like you always say." Laurent stood back a moment, watching with aching pride as his children surrounded their youngest with love. Then he stepped forward, pulling Camille into his arms. The embrace was long, wordless, father and daughter holding one another as though time could be paused. When they parted, Laurent helped load the trunk onto the cart, movements slow and deliberate. The family stood together in the yard a little longer, no one quite ready to say the final goodbye. Sunlight warmed their faces, birds sang, the horse waited patiently. Camille looked at each beloved face, memorizing them in this golden light. Then, with quiet courage, she climbed into the cart beside her father. The horse started forward down the familiar path, cottage shrinking behind them. Siblings waved until trees closed in. The journey began. Laurent stood apart at first, eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night, struggling to maintain the composure expected of a father. When Camille approached him, he pulled her into a long, fierce hug, as if he could shield her from the future by holding tight enough in the present. "My brave girl," he whispered into her hair, voice thick. "My beautiful, brave girl. I am so proud, and so sorry." Camille held him just as tightly, feeling the familiar scratch of his wool coat against her cheek, breathing in the faint scent of wood smoke and horse that always clung to him. "You have nothing to be sorry for," she murmured. "You brought us roses when you could. And now, I will bring us hope." They stood like that for a long moment, neither willing to let go first. Finally, Laurent helped her into the cart beside her trunk, climbed up himself, and took the reins. The horse plodded forward down the familiar path away from the cottage, siblings waving from the doorway until the trees closed in. The journey would take 2 full days. Laurent insisted on accompanying her the entire way. He would not let his youngest daughter arrive alone at those forbidding gates. Conversation was quiet at first, both lost in thoughts. They spoke of small things, memories of her mother singing while baking, the year the apple tree bore so much fruit they gave baskets away, the way Daniel used to hide in the garden pretending to be a knight. Laughter came softly at some recollections, tears at others. That first night they stayed at a small inn Laurent knew along the way, simple but clean, with a warm fire and plain but nourishing supper of stew and bread. Camille slept fitfully in the narrow bed, dreaming of dark hallways and the sound of wind howling around tall stone walls, waking often to check that her father slept soundly in the room next door. The second day brought changeable weather, bright sun giving way to scudding clouds and a rising wind that tugged at cloaks and sent leaves swirling across the path. As evening approached, the forest grew denser, the road narrower, shadows lengthening between ancient trees. Laurent's face grew more drawn with every mile, his hands tight on the reins. At last, as twilight deepened into dusk, they reached the place Laurent remembered, the narrow turnoff from the main road, marked by an ancient oak split by lightning years ago. He halted the horse. Ahead, through the gathering gloom, stood the high stone wall, and the tall iron gates, slightly ajar as before. Father and daughter sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind whisper through the trees, the only sound in the still evening. Finally, Laurent climbed down and helped Camille from the cart. Together they unhitched the horse and led her through the gates, pulling the small cart behind. The paved walkway stretched ahead, disappearing into shadow. Overgrown gardens pressed close on either side, wild roses tangled with ivy, untended flowerbeds spilling onto the path, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading blooms. The chateau loomed at the end, darker and more immense than Camille had imagined from her father's descriptions, its many windows like watchful eyes in the failing light. They stopped at the wide front steps. Laurent tied the horse securely to a ring set in the stone wall, then turned to his daughter. The farewell was quiet but fierce. He held her for a long time, stroking her hair as he had when she was small, murmuring blessings and promises to visit, to write, to pray daily for her safety. Camille clung to him, memorizing the feel of his arms, the scratch of his coat, the familiar scent that meant home. "I will be all right, father," she whispered when they finally parted. "I promise to write often. Take care of yourself, and tell the others I love them." One last embrace, long, wordless, filled with everything they could not say. Then Laurent stepped back, climbed into the cart, and turned the horse toward the gates. He did not look back. If he had, he might not have been able to leave. Camille watched until the cart disappeared beyond the wall, until the sound of hooves faded into the wind, until she stood truly alone. She turned then, picked up her small trunk with both hands, and walked slowly up the wide stone steps. The heavy front door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting. A cool breeze stirred the leaves at her feet, carrying the faint, sweet scent of late roses. Taking a slow, steadying breath, she pushed the door open wider, and stepped inside. Into shadows, into silence, into mystery, into her new life. And so begins our gentle tale. And so ends our dreamy journey through Beauty and the Beast, a reminder that kindness, patience, and an open heart can transform even the loneliest castle into a home filled with light. I hope this story has wrapped you in calm and carried you softly towards sleep. If you enjoyed drifting off with us tonight, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs peaceful nights, and subscribe to Sleep Stories with notifications on, so you never miss a new relaxing tale each week. Thank you for being here. Sweet dreams. Good night. Crescent Moon.